What if I told you that one company has more influence over your daily life than most governments? A company that, through the money it manages, owns a piece of almost everything you buy, every service you use, and every major corporation you've ever heard of. Its decisions can influence elections, shift industries, and help shape the economic future of entire nations. This isn't some dystopian plot. This is the reality of BlackRock. And at the heart of it all is one man. He isn't a household name like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. He rarely makes headlines and seems to avoid the spotlight, yet he consults with presidents and prime ministers, and his annual letters are treated like gospel by the most powerful CEOs on the planet. His name is Larry Fink. He's the billionaire founder and CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, a firm that manages a mind-boggling amount of money. As of mid-2025, BlackRock has over $12.5 trillion in assets under management. To try and put that number in perspective, it's a pool of capital larger than the annual economic output of every country on Earth, except for the United States and China. Now, to be clear, this isn't BlackRock's own money. It belongs to their clients, pension funds, governments, and everyday people. They can't just go and buy Apple or Microsoft, but being the steward of that much capital gives them immense influence. This single firm is one of the biggest shareholders in most of the S&P 500. They have a stake in your bank, your car company, your supermarket, and the phone in your hand. So how did this happen? How did one man operating in the shadows of global finance build an empire that quietly helps shape the world we live in? The answer is as shocking as the scale of his power. Because the story of how BlackRock got here doesn't start with a stroke of genius or some grand vision. It starts with one of the most catastrophic, humiliating failures in Wall Street history. A failure that cost his company $100 million in a single afternoon and nearly ended his career before it even began. This is the story of Larry Fink, the silent billionaire who influences the world. To understand the man who oversees the world's largest pool of money, you first have to understand the moment he lost a fortune. The story doesn't begin in a gleaming Manhattan boardroom. It starts in the loud, high-stakes trading pits of the 1980s at an investment bank called First Boston. And it's here that a young, ambitious bond trader named Larry Fink was about to learn a lesson that would change his life and the future of global finance forever. It was a lesson that cost $100 million. The man before the billions. Before the name Larry Fink was whispered in the corridors of power, he was just another sharp, ambitious kid from California with something to prove. Born in 1952, he grew up in a middle-class family, a world away from the Wall Street he would one day dominate. He went to UCLA for political science before getting an MBA in real estate. In 1976, degree in hand and hungry to make his mark, he moved to New York and landed a job at the prestigious investment bank, First Boston. This was the Wild West era of modern finance. Deregulation was unleashing new, exotic financial products, and fortunes were being made and lost at incredible speeds. Fink wasn't just there for the ride. He was helping to build the roller coaster. He was assigned to the bond department, which at the time was seen as a pretty sleepy corner of the bank compared to the glamour of stocks. But Fink saw something others didn't. He saw a chance to create something new. His focus was on a new, poorly understood product, the mortgage-backed security, or MBS. The concept was revolutionary. For decades, if a bank lent you money for a house, that loan just sat on its books for 30 years, slowly earning interest. It was safe, but it was slow, and it tied up the bank's money. Fink and his team helped pioneer a way to change that. They would buy up thousands of these individual home loans from banks, bundle them together into one giant portfolio, and then sell slices of that portfolio to big investors. It was like financial alchemy. For the banks, it was a miracle. They could get loans off their books almost instantly, freeing up cash to make even more loans and fueling a housing boom. For investors, it offered a steady income stream, backed by what seemed like the safest asset on earth, the American dream. And for Larry Fink, it was a ticket to the top. He was brilliant, aggressive, and had a natural gift for structuring these complex deals. By his early 30s, he was a star, a managing director at First Boston making huge profits for the firm. He was seen as a wonderkin, a genius who helped invent a major financial innovation. By all accounts, he was invincible. And as anyone on Wall Street will tell you, the moment you start to believe you're invincible is usually right before disaster strikes. The market he helped create was getting more complicated. The computer models used to predict how these mortgage bundles would behave were still primitive. They were based on old data and assumptions about interest rates. In the high-pressure world of the trading floor, the demand for bigger and bigger profits was relentless. And Fink, First Boston's golden boy, was expected to keep delivering. He had built a reputation on taking calculated risks and winning. But in the spring of 1986, he made a bet that was bigger and riskier than anyone imagined. A bet that would go so catastrophically wrong, it would not only define his career, but also plant the seed for the global giant he would one day create. The $100 million humiliation. In the second quarter of 1986, Larry Fink's world came crashing down. The details are technical, but the story is brutally simple. Fink's trading desk made a massive, leveraged bet on which way interest rates would go. He and his team were sure rates were going one way. They were wrong. The market swung violently in the opposite direction. In the gut instinct world of 1980s trading, a small miscalculation could spiral into a catastrophe with stunning speed. The models Fink's team used completely failed to predict how bad the swing would be. The risk they thought they had under control suddenly became an inferno. In just a few hours, the department that had been a profit machine was bleeding cash. When the dust settled, the final number was staggering, a loss of $100 million. Today, when we hear about trillion-dollar bailouts, $100 million might not sound like a company killer. But in 1986, it was a cataclysm. It was one of the biggest trading losses a major Wall Street firm had ever seen. And the blame landed squarely on the shoulders of its star trader, Larry Fink. The fallout was swift and merciless. Overnight, Fink went from the firm's golden boy to its cautionary tale. He was sidelined. His reputation was shattered. The phone calls from admiring colleagues just stopped. He was professionally radioactive. While he wasn't fired right away, his career at First Boston was over. He stayed on for a while, like a ghost on the trading floor he once ruled, before leaving the firm that had made him and then broken him. This was more than a financial loss. It was a deep, personal humiliation. And for Fink, it was a moment of painful clarity. The problem, he realized, wasn't that he had taken a risk. Wall Street is built on risk. The problem was that he hadn't truly understood the risk. He and his team were flying blind. They had built these incredibly complex financial machines but didn't have the tools to see all the hidden dangers. They were like architects designing skyscrapers without a full grasp of physics. It was only a matter of time before one came crashing down. That $100 million failure became the fire in which the rest of his life would be forged. It gave him a deep, almost fanatical obsession with risk. Not with avoiding it, that's impossible in finance, but with understanding it, measuring it, and pricing it with absolute precision. He vowed he would never again be surprised by the market. He would never again make a decision without seeing the full picture. This obsession became the founding principle of his next venture. It was an idea born not from ambition, but from the ashes of a spectacular failure. He didn't just want to build another investment firm, he wanted to build a fortress. A company so dedicated to risk management that it would be fundamentally different. He imagined a company where technology and data would strip the ego and guesswork out of investing. A company that could see the future, or at least every possible version of it. It was a vision that would lead him and a handful of partners to create a small advisory shop, a firm they would name BlackRock. In 1988, 2 years after his public shaming, Larry Fink was ready for his second act. He wasn't going to do it alone. He gathered a team of 7 partners, including Robert Capito, who is still his trusted number 2 today. They were a mix of sharp traders and data geeks, all united by Fink's new belief that risk management wasn't just a department, it was the heart of the entire company. To get started, they needed cash. Fink, still carrying the stain of the $100 million loss, wasn't exactly a hot commodity. He went to Pete Peterson of the Blackstone Group, a major private equity firm, and pitched his vision. This wasn't about making flashy trades. It was about providing sophisticated, data-driven risk analysis for big institutional clients. Peterson liked the concept and agreed to put up a $5 million line of credit in exchange for a 50% stake. As a playful nod to their backer, they named the new venture BlackRock.
From day one, BlackRock was different. Fink's obsession with risk was in its DNA. While other firms chased hot stocks and relied on star traders' gut feelings, the team at BlackRock was hunched over computers, building something new. They were creating a technological nervous system that could analyze investments not just one by one, but as part of a huge interconnected portfolio. They wanted to see how a shift in Japanese interest rates might affect German bonds, or how a spike in oil prices could ripple through a pension fund. This project, born from the trauma of 1986, became their masterpiece. They called it Aladdin, an acronym for Asset, Liability, and Debt and Derivative Investment Network. Aladdin wasn't just software, it was a revolution in a box. It was a single platform that combined portfolio management, trading, and cutting-edge risk analysis. For the first time, a manager could see their entire universe of assets and all the hidden risks in one place, in real time. Aladdin could run stress tests, modeling how a portfolio would hold up under thousands of different scenarios, from a mild recession to a total market meltdown, like the one that cost Fink his job. It was the tool he desperately wished he'd had at First Boston. At first, Aladdin was just for them, their secret sauce. But Fink and his partners quickly realized the tool they'd built was even more valuable than the advice they were selling. Other banks, insurance companies, and pension funds were all struggling with the same problem Fink had faced. So they made a brilliant move. They started licensing Aladdin to them. This was a stroke of strategic genius. BlackRock wasn't just managing money anymore, it was selling the picks and shovels for the whole industry's gold rush. Every new Aladdin client meant a new revenue stream, and just as importantly, more data. The more portfolios Aladdin watched, the smarter it got, creating a feedback loop that fueled the company's growth. By 1994, the relationship with Blackstone was getting strained, so they split and BlackRock became its own company. They went public in 1999, using the money to expand even faster. Throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, BlackRock grew steadily, earning a reputation as the smartest, most disciplined manager in the business. They weren't the biggest or the flashiest. They were the ones who did their homework. They were the ones who worried about the downside. Fink, the man who got burned by a risk he didn't understand, was now running a firm built to prevent that from ever happening again. He was building his fortress, one digital brick at a time. And in 2008, when the entire global financial system started to crack, that fortress would be one of the only ones left standing. The year 2008 was the moment Larry Fink's whole life seemed to lead up to. The global financial system was in freefall, brought to its knees by the very things Fink had helped create 2 decades earlier: mortgage-backed securities. Only now they had been mutated into monstrously complex derivatives called CDOs. Wall Street had built a skyscraper of debt on a foundation of sand, and the whole thing was collapsing. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. The insurance giant AIG was about to implode, holding trillions in toxic mortgage assets it couldn't even value. Bear Stearns had already collapsed. The US government was facing a crisis it hadn't seen since the Great Depression. Officials at the Treasury and the Federal Reserve were staring into a black hole, trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. They needed to know what all this financial garbage was actually worth. There was only one person they could call. In the darkest days of the crisis, the phone rang in Larry Fink's office. It was the US government. They didn't turn to Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, they turned to BlackRock. They needed someone who could make sense of the chaos, and Fink's firm was the only one with the tool for the job: Aladdin. It was the ultimate vindication. The very failure that had made Fink an outcast on Wall Street led him to build the one system that could now help save it. The government hired BlackRock to analyze and manage the toxic assets from the Bear Stearns and AIG bailouts. It was an incredible role. Suddenly, this private company was at the center of the largest government rescue in history, advising the Federal Reserve on how to handle the meltdown. BlackRock basically became the cleanup crew for the financial apocalypse. They used Aladdin to sift through the wreckage, analyze billions in complex securities, and provide a clear, unbiased assessment of the damage. Their role was critical. By putting a price on these toxic assets, they helped bring a little stability and confidence back to a market gripped by pure panic. This elevated BlackRock to a completely new level of power. They were no longer just another big asset manager. They were now seen as an indispensable partner to governments and central banks. Their reputation for sober, unmatched risk expertise was sealed. The 2008 crisis cemented the perception of BlackRock as a kind of fourth branch of government, a firm operating at the intersection of Wall Street and Washington, wielding immense power behind the scenes. In the years that followed, this role only grew. When the European debt crisis hit, European governments called BlackRock for advice. Fink had transformed his firm from a niche player into a global financial firefighter. The trauma of his $100 million loss was finally gone. He had faced the demon of systemic risk and won. But in doing so, he had built an empire so large and influential that people were starting to get nervous. The firm created to manage risk was now so powerful and so embedded in global finance that many began to ask, had BlackRock itself become the biggest risk of all? In the years since the 2008 crisis, BlackRock's rise has been unstoppable. The firm that was called in to save the system has, in many ways, become the system. Today, with over $12.5 trillion in assets under management, its scale is hard to wrap your head around. This is money they manage for clients, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and millions of regular investors through their massive iShares ETF business, which alone is nearly $5 trillion. So what does that staggering number actually mean? It means BlackRock is one of the top 3 shareholders in a huge portion of the world's biggest companies. Pick a major name: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan Chase, and chances are BlackRock is one of their biggest investors. This gives them enormous, though indirect, influence. Through their shareholder votes, they can help shape who sits on the board and influence company strategy on everything from executive pay to climate change. And it's on that last point, climate change, that Larry Fink has turned BlackRock from a quiet financial giant into a hugely controversial and political force. About a decade ago, Fink started using his annual letter to CEOs, maybe the single most read document in the business world, to push a new idea: stakeholder capitalism. He argued that to succeed long-term, companies couldn't just focus on profits. They had to think about their impact on everyone: employees, customers, communities, and the planet. His most explosive move was declaring that climate risk is investment risk. He announced that BlackRock would start using environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, criteria in its investment process. The firm began pushing companies to disclose their climate risks and their plans for a low-carbon future. To many, Fink had become the new conscience of Wall Street, using his leverage to force corporate titans to take climate change seriously. But this pivot has also put BlackRock and Fink personally in the middle of a political firestorm. They're now fighting a war on 2 fronts. From the political right, politicians in energy-producing states accuse BlackRock of woke capitalism. They claim the firm is boycotting fossil fuels to push a left-wing agenda that harms the American energy industry. States like Texas have even pulled billions of dollars from BlackRock in protest. At the same time, BlackRock gets hit hard by environmental activists and the political left. They argue the firm's ESG talk is mostly greenwashing. They point out that while Fink talks a big game on climate, BlackRock is still one of the world's largest investors in fossil fuel companies, including major oil and coal producers. They say BlackRock is trying to have it both ways, polishing its green reputation while still profiting from the industries driving the climate crisis. In 2024, BlackRock even pulled back from the Climate Action 100+ initiative, citing legal risks, which only made activists angrier.
Fink is stuck in an impossible position, branded as both a climate zealot and a climate hypocrite. His every move is scrutinized, his motives questioned from all sides. The quiet, analytical man who built an empire on the cold logic of risk management is now caught in the messy, emotional, and polarized world of a culture war.
This battle over the soul of capitalism, with BlackRock at its center, is one of the biggest stories of our time.
It raises huge questions about power, accountability, and the role of corporations in our world. If you're finding this deep dive into the hidden forces shaping your life valuable, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell.
We release videos like this every week, exploring the powerful figures and complex systems that quietly influence our world. Your support helps us keep bringing these important stories to light. Now let's get back to the man in the middle of the storm, the silent statesman. So who is the man presiding over this vast, controversial empire? Despite his immense power, Larry Fink remains an intensely private and deliberate person. He's the opposite of the flamboyant Wall Street titans you see in movies. He doesn't seek out the media, he mostly avoids it, preferring to speak through his carefully written annual letters and a few high-level interviews. He describes himself as still a student, a man who believes in constant learning, even as he advises world leaders. His leadership style is a direct result of the lesson he learned from his early failure. He is methodical, cautious, and deeply analytical. He knows that in today's hyper-transparent world, every word from a leader like him will be picked apart and weaponized. He has said that leaders must be much more judicious in what they say because the stakes are higher than ever. He walks the ESG tightrope with practiced caution, insisting BlackRock's focus on sustainability isn't political, but is part of its duty to its clients. The logic is simple and comes back to his core obsession. Climate change creates huge financial risks, and ignoring those risks is just bad investing. It's a pragmatic, almost clinical argument, an attempt to depoliticize an issue that has become anything but. And that's the great paradox of Larry Fink's story. This is a man who built a global empire on predictability and control. His life's work was creating a system, Aladdin, designed to tame the wild, chaotic forces of the market. Yet he now finds himself at the center of the most unpredictable and chaotic storms of our time. He is a financial statesman who must also be a political operator, a numbers man forced to navigate a world of shifting ideologies. The silent billionaire who wanted to master the world of risk now finds himself running a gauntlet of public opinion, a position for which no amount of data could have ever truly prepared him. The story of Larry Fink is one of failure and redemption, of vision and unintended consequences. It all comes back to that one catastrophic day in 1986. That $100 million loss wasn't just a bad day, it was the seed from which everything else grew. It was the trauma that created an obsession with risk that led to the creation of a revolutionary technology, Aladdin. That technology allowed him to build an investment firm, BlackRock, on the principles of caution and foresight. And when the world's financial system, drunk on the very kind of recklessness that once burned him, finally collapsed, Fink's firm was the one called to clean up the mess. That role launched BlackRock into the stratosphere, creating an entity with more financial influence than most nations. Today, that power is at the heart of a global debate. Is Larry Fink the conscience of capitalism, using his influence to guide the world toward a more sustainable future? Or is he the head of a shadow government, an unaccountable power broker pushing a political agenda? The truth, as it so often is probably somewhere in the complicated gray area in between. What is undeniable is the scale of the empire he built. From the ashes of one of Wall Street's most epic failures, Larry Fink built a machine to understand and manage the world's financial risk. In the process, he created a new center of power, one so vast and so intertwined with our daily lives that we're only just beginning to grasp its full impact. He is the silent billionaire who, in ways most of us will never see, truly influences the world. And it all started with one very, very bad day at the office.